Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Dia de los Muertos has indigenous Mexican origins. It also has roots in defiance against colonial oppression. Some cities with significant Latino populations in this country are canceling their annual Dia de los Muertos celebrations this weekend because of concerns over immigration crackdowns. Others view it as especially important now in reaction to a rise in targeted political rhetoric. We'll explore more about the day and its deeper meaning right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. This weekend on the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Oregon, volunteers will search for 71-year-old Wesley Dixon Jones, a tribal elder who's been missing since October 5th. As Buffalo's Fire senior reporter Brian Bull explains, the search team is testing a device that the coordinator says could be a game changer.
Kimberly Linning of MMIW Search and Help Alliance out of Portland says Aqua Eye Pro bounces echoes off underwater objects, then compares them to the echoes of a human body.
It scans 1 acre of water up to 180 feet about every 30 minutes. And that is what we're going to take down on the deep pockets of the Umatilla on our search. If Mr. Jones is in the water, this will find him.
Jones's daughter Molly Ann is hopeful the device will deliver.
And also utilizing canines and divers to help locate my father. Right now, this is very, very important, utilizing that resource.
Linning says her group is using the Aqua Eye on a trial basis. She hopes perhaps donors will cover the $29,000 cost of one they can use permanently. For National Native News, I'm Brian Bull.
The government shutdown is delaying funding for a federal heating assistance program. In Alaska, thousands of low-income families use the program to offset their heating costs and to weatherize their homes for winter. Many of them are tribal citizens. The Alaska Desk's Ayolna Naiden has more.
The Alaska Department of Health said in a statement Thursday that the government shutdown has delayed the release of money for the federal Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program for the year of 2026. The program subsidizes energy bills for about 50,000 Alaskans, many of whom live in rural and tribal communities. Jennifer Hyde is a federal infrastructure coordinator at the statewide nonprofit, the Alaska Center.
It definitely benefits a lot of rural and tribal communities. Disproportionately, those communities are often, low income or have different economic struggles.
For now, the state health officials say they are operating the program using the remaining money from the previous year, and they say they expect that money to run out by mid-November. The department said it usually takes 4 to 6 weeks for the heating assistance funds to be released to states after the shutdown is over. Alaska tribal organizations are raising the alarm. The Tanana Chiefs Conference administers heating assistance for over 1,200 households. Amber Vasca is the executive director of Tribal Government and Client Services at the organization. She said by email that the federal program is, quote, a lifeline across the interior, end quote. Vasca said that the program, which also helps people weatherize their homes to cut on heating costs, is a way to ensure pipes don't freeze when temperatures drop to -50. The government shutdown is also affecting other programs crucial for Alaska Native communities, like food assistance and Tribal Head Start. Hyde, with the Alaska Center, says families who rely on heating assistance are the same vulnerable residents who will be affected by the loss of food benefits.
It's going to be a really tough winter unless something can give.
In the meantime, the State Department of Health said its staff is prioritizing applications by focusing on households in the heating emergency or at immediate risk of losing heat. I am Alona Naiden.
Tribes across the country are preparing for the halt of federal food benefits beginning November 1st due to the government shutdown. The Shawnee tribe in Oklahoma declared an emergency this week, releasing emergency funds to help citizens who may lose their benefits. Chief Ben Barnes said in a statement the federal government may be closed, but the Shawnee tribe's government remains open, and no Shawnee family should go hungry because of political dysfunction in Washington. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by Sonosky Chambers Law, championing tribal sovereignty and Native American rights since 1976. From opioids litigation to treaty rights to tribal self-governance. With offices in Washington, D.C., New Mexico, California, and Alaska. Sonosky Chambers Law. Support by AARP, whose Family Caregiver Resource Guide is available to caregivers by calling 877-333-5885 or at aarp.org/caregiver resources.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Latino organizations in cities all over the country are preparing parades and other celebrations to mark the Mexican holiday Dia de los Muertos. Individuals also take time to clean their dead relatives' graves and tend to their personal altars or ofrendas. It's a day that's now built around the Catholic All Souls Day, but its origins go back to an indigenous ceremonial reverence for people's ancestors and an acknowledgement of our own mortality. This year, some organizations in this country are scaling back their public Day of the Dead celebrations because of the ongoing federal crackdowns on immigration. Today we'll hear about work to reconnect the day to its meaningful indigenous roots, and a little later we'll also talk about a new push to train and support young Native filmmakers. You can join our conversation as always. Just give us a call at 1-800-996-2848. That number again, 1-800-996-2848, or just 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Tempe, Arizona, is Anita Huizar Hernandez. She is an associate director of the Hispanic Research Center and publisher and managing editor of The Bilingual Press at Arizona State University. Anita, good morning and welcome to Native America Calling.
Good morning.
Joining us from Los Angeles, California is Janet Martinez. She is the executive director of Comunidades Indigenas en Liderazgo, or CIELO. She is Zapotec. Janet, good morning to you also, and welcome.
Badursh, and good morning to everyone.
And joining us from Albuquerque, New Mexico is Curly Tlapoyawa. He is an archaeologist and co-host of the podcast Tales from Atlantis. He is Chicano and Nawa. Curly, hello to you as well. Good to have you on the show today.
Glad to be here. Good morning, everyone.
Anita, I want to go ahead and begin with you today. People all across the country will be painting their faces. They'll be attending parades. Some of our listeners, though, might not grasp how this has become a symbol for what we know in the U.S. as Dia de los Muertos. Can you help us understand the deeper meaning and origins?
Yes, so Dia de los Muertos has really complex, deeply rooted origins that are quite global. It draws from different European traditions, Catholic and non-Catholic, different indigenous traditions as well, mostly in this hemisphere, as well as some African roots. So it really is a celebration of life and connection with those who have come before us that connects many different places in the world.
Tell us more about these indigenous people in Mexico who had a ceremonial connection to the dead. What groups?
So yes, we see a lot of different communities that are connected with Dia de los Muertos. We see that, of course, as the history of colonialism has taught us, when the Spaniards came, they were connecting with all kinds of different communities who had their own celebrations. And I think it's important to remember that those celebrations were very varied. And so that's why you see so much diversity in terms of Dia de los Muertos and the way that it's celebrated. And so some of the things that have become really well known draw, for example, from Aztec communities, but some of them draw from other kinds of communities. And that's why people, especially who have traveled through different parts of Mexico, will have seen, quite a variety in terms of what has been iconic about the holiday.
Anita, how does the holiday also include political and rebel elements?
So, something that is really interesting about the way that Dia de los Muertos has become popularized in the United States is a lot of that recognition of the holiday here is actually due to Chicano artists in the 1960s and 70s who were looking to reconnect with their roots beyond the United States to understand, their complex history in terms of how they had come to be in this particular place. And those artists really did a lot of digging in terms of different traditions and celebrations. And Dia de los Muertos was one of those important touchstones. And those artists really are responsible for bringing the large communal celebrations as well as resurrecting some of the classic iconography, especially the calavera or the skeleton that many of your listeners are probably seeing right now and this weekend. And if any of your listeners are interested in learning more, the Bilingual Press has actually just released a new book about Dia de los Muertos and its Chicano arts legacy. And so that book is available on our website and is also going to be available in free open access digital editions in English and Spanish.
Okay, now you mentioned the connection to Chicano artists in the 1960s and 70s. So it sounds like there's a correlation here to the beginnings of the La Raza movement. But the famous illustration that you mentioned, Calavera Katrina, she dates back to the early 1900s. Am I correct?
She does. She dates back to the very well-known engraver and illustrator Jose Guadalupe Posada. He is actually the artist behind the extremely well-known now Katrina symbol, which is in the public domain, and that's why you see it on all kinds of different products. And he was really an inspiration to later artists like Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, and Chicano artists found him through them. And so they were first looking to Rivera and Kahlo and artists from that time period, and through them found Jose Guadalupe Posada, who really was a satirist and used the Calavera figure to create some very biting political satire. And that was a helpful model for Chicano artists who were also interested in making political critiques through the Calavera.
Do we know when Dia de los Muertos became connected to the Catholic observance of All Saints' Day?
I think it's pretty hard to pinpoint exact time periods, but certainly very early on in the colonial period, the Spaniards were looking to create certain resonance with what was already existing in the hemisphere. And so those affinities came through rather quickly.
Okay. Now, I think a lot of our listeners, a lot of people in the United States, in fact, they'll make the connection to Halloween with Dia de los Muertos, especially with some of the costumes and the imagery. Would you like to touch on the commercialization of the holiday?
Yes. So Dia de los Muertos is not Halloween, but it's understandable that because all of this is happening around the same few days, that there's a lot of connection that's made between the two. But Dia de los Muertos is not supposed to be frightening. The Calavera is not supposed to be scary necessarily. And I think that when you see the over commercialization of the holiday, sometimes that deeper meaning, the sort of sacred roots of Dia de los Muertos can get lost. Probably the most iconic example of Dia de los Muertos being commercialized is when Disney tried to trademark Dia de los Muertos in the run-up to the film Coco, which of course was unsuccessful eventually. But that impetus to profit off of Dia de los Muertos, I think, is why we see the hollowing out sometimes in the collective awareness of the really complex and beautiful roots of this holiday.
Thank you for kicking us off, Anita. I want to bring Janet Martinez into the conversation now. She is in Los Angeles, California, executive director of Cielo. And Janet, tell us how people in Los Angeles will celebrate Dia de los Muertos this year.
Sure. I think that Dia de los Muertos is so unique and so diverse, how kind of like it was just spoken about. But I think it's important to remember that there's a lot of indigenous communities that were outside of those movements, right? For example, I learned about Day of the Dead from my family directly. I learned from my grandmother, and my grandmother learned from her grandmothers. And I think it's a generational thing that wasn't necessarily impacted through media and through art in that same way, because we come from rural communities. In Mexico, there are around 68 indigenous groups, and those 68 indigenous groups celebrate Day of the Dead in diverse ways. And at Cielo, we work with many of the indigenous migrant communities that came from Mexico. Those 68 indigenous ways of being, seeing, learning, speaking their different languages migrated to Los Angeles, and we have community members that are Maya Yucatecos, and they observe it for a whole month, the Day of the Dead. They start on the 1st and they end at the end of the month. So I think that it's so diverse, the way that we experience Day of the Dead, and Cielo really seeks to share the different experiences. And for us, one of the projects that we're launching this Saturday with the community members is doing art workshops to, pass down different arts and crafts that are done along Day of the Dead that are popularized now. But we also want to share a book that we created from within Cielo that was called Building Altars with My Tawa and Tawa, which is Grandma and Grandpa in Zapotec. And I think that it's really fundamental to create these kind of texts, these kind of visions from indigenous communities' perspectives that have directly learned from their ancestors, from their grandparents, from their parents.
Thank you, Janet. And you folks sent a press copy of the book that you just described, and it's beautiful, just very vibrantly illustrated, bright colors, really big images. How's the feedback for this book, and who's it intended for?
It's intended for the young people that are Zapotec, that have people that speak Zapotec in their homes, whose mothers and fathers speak it. And that's really who the intended audience is for people that have those strong connections to their families, to their lineage that directly celebrates their ancestors, right? And I think it's really important, especially in a city like Los Angeles. I'm sure that y'all can understand the experience of being outside of your homeland, outside of your territory, and still trying to preserve and revitalize our language, especially because language has been one of the things that we've seen has really been attacked in indigenous communities, and there have been an erasure of the different indigenous languages. And for us, Zapotec is something that my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents spoke, and it's not something that I'm fluent in. So I do think it's really important to create a space to have the words that we still hold, that we still have, to pass them on and pique an interest in young people, to pique an interest since they're young.
Thank you, Janet. We're going to take a short break. We will be right back. We'll continue our conversation. Dia de los Muertos. Stay with us. When mentioning the Arctic, wildfires aren't usually the first thought that comes to mind. But climate change is fueling more wildfires in the Arctic in recent years than ever before. On the next Native America Calling, we'll talk with Indigenous wildfire managers about how Indigenous communities are responding to this new trend.
Hey, isto man ko hot wea ke tenam awa na kap to banisi ke nawa. Yam to da ko mos awa shu ap to ki kwati ko is breast cancer screening teatro to mati na panna. Asta tayu yan ka ni hanan to this healthcare.gov/coverage ke awa nan ta isto 1-800-318-2596 sa pedana ke dap to. Look your Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to na pedanito lo ke nawe. Ela kwa.
We're glad you're listening to Native America Calling. We're talking about Dia de los Muertos today. Does your Native community acknowledge the holiday this weekend? You can let us know by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have the phone lines open. We're waiting for your call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. We're speaking now with Janet Martinez in Los Angeles, California. She's the executive director of Cielo. And Janet, before break, you talked a little bit about how people in Los Angeles typically will celebrate Dia de los Muertos, but I'm interested in knowing this year, will it be any different with regard to some of the political turmoil that we're experiencing?
You know, Los Angeles has been through what I would think I would call a campaign of terror, right, by the federal government, in which people are being picked off the street, and we don't know by who. But given the situation, we turn to the community and ask them, like, do you all want to meet in person? Would you all rather transition to virtual? And a lot of them said no, like being in community gives me like help, gives me relief, gives me companionship. And I think that a lot of times as Indigenous folks, like that's where we turn to when times get tough, which is community and collective care. And that's exactly what we've been doing. And our event is going to move forward. During these tough times, I think it's especially important to make a space for community.
Now, I understand you won't be canceling any celebrations this year, but have you had any conversations with regard to security or just making sure that the events will be safe or any other issues that might arise based on some of the current tension we're experiencing in the U.S.?
For sure, we have a closed space, right? Especially keeping in mind the situation. So we definitely do have procedures in place to close the space if anything were to arise. In our offices, we're going to hold the event. So, of course, we do have safety protocols in case anything were to happen.
Okay. And I want to go back and talk a little bit more about the book because I did mention I really have enjoyed reading the copy that you folks sent over. And in addition to the illustrations and the family and the celebrations, it looks like food is a big part of the holiday as well. Can you talk about that a little bit before we move on to our next guest?
For sure. I think that that's one of the things that I found super interesting once when we went to the Northern Plains area and they explained to us that y'all have a spirit plate, right? And I think that that's very similar to the practices that we have where we put offerings of food, of the past one's favorite food, the favorite drinks. So there's a variety of different breads that are placed on the altars. And for us, we do the one that kind of looks like a little dead person. And we put that, or like the ones that look like little animals. And there's very specific foods that are regional to the Sierra Norte from where we made the book, which is like the moles are really important for us, making tamales. Tamales specifically, we make bean tamales that are multi-layered. And it's really recalling to our ancestral past and the way that we've cooked, right, before colonialism. So I think that it's really important to save these recipes and pass this on to the next generation so that they can also have a direct connection with their ancestors and with their stories and with their resistance and resilience.
Okay, and this idea of feeding the spirits like that, I mean, there are similar practices in Pueblo communities in New Mexico as well. So that's really fascinating just to see that the vibrance of this culture. And again, really good job with this book. It's titled Shtawa and Tawa, Altar Building with Shtawa and Tawa. Great job, Janet.
Thank you.
I want to bring Curly Tlapoyawa into the conversation. Now, Curly, I'm sorry I had your name pronounced well earlier. I apologize. But thank you again for joining the show. You're in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Tell us more about the origins of Dia de los Muertos and how it became associated with the Catholic All Saints' Day.
Sure. So what we know about Dia de los Muertos, the modern renditions of Dia de los Muertos, a lot of it comes from these Central Mexican traditions. In the Nahua traditions, there were actually two feasts, and the feasts lasted 40 days. So the first feast was called Micailhuitl, and the second feast was Hue Micailhuitl, and these actually began in like early August and lasted through about mid-September. And when the Spaniards came, they brought this All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day with them. But what happened is as Indigenous people, as resilient people, as subversive people, we were able to take our traditions and basically infuse them into the All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, so November 1st and November 2nd. And this actually caught the attention of Catholic priests, in particular Diego Duran, who was one of the priests that was basically tasked with eliminating or destroying indigenous traditions in Mesoamerica. And he took note of this practice. If you look at his writings, he talks about that, you know, the indigenous Mexicans, the Mexicanos, are still practicing their traditions. They've just hidden them within All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. And he was trying to figure out a way to stop this, to keep this practice from happening. I mean, he obviously failed, right, because it's still happening today. But I think we should acknowledge that what we're doing today was actually an indigenization of a Catholic holiday, which I thought was very cool. It's very much rooted in indigenous resistance.
Tell us more about the historical record, Curly, and what did Spanish priests write about Indigenous Day of the Dead celebrations? And because it sounds like they were concerned, and what was their concern? Why did they not want Indigenous people to practice like this?
Well, they really perceived everything that Indigenous people were doing as witchcraft and as signs of worshiping the devil, right? So you had Indigenous sacred beings in Nahuatl. They're called the Teteo, and they would refer to our Teteo as demons. And so they looked at it as stamping out satanic idolatry when they came here. And when you look at the record, the way that they described the indigenous traditions, it's very similar to what we're seeing today, because they described, they would offer chocolate, they would offer tamales, they would offer flowers, they would offer song. There was a tradition of going to the roofs of your houses and shouting the names of your ancestors who had passed, and you would shout their names to the north, which is the region of the dead in our tradition, in terms of the four directions. It's called Mictlampa, the region of the dead. So there's all these traditions that, even though, not through any altruistic purpose were they recording these, they weren't recording these things because they wanted to preserve them. They recorded our practices and our customs because they wanted it to be a sort of a handbook or a guide for Catholic priests to look for these things, so that they could tell if we were actually converting honestly to Catholicism or doing it covertly, keeping our traditions alive under the veneer of becoming Catholics. And if you look at the records, you'll see that they were really adamant about keeping us from doing these things. At one point in time, they even tried to outlaw the eating of tamales, because tamales are so associated with indigenous traditions and honoring our ancestors. And obviously that failed, right? So we're still here, and our traditions survive and persist, which I think is a very profound and beautiful thing.
Curly, an underlying theme that I see here with Dia de los Muertos and the indigenous communities that have celebrated it throughout history is this acknowledgement of human mortality, right? This idea and this being very open and attached to the whole idea of death. And that's something that we don't necessarily see in other tribes, especially here in the United States, perhaps.
Yeah, there's very, we're a diverse population. These two hemispheres have millions of people with different worldviews and outlooks. So I think it's important to acknowledge and respect, other people's traditions as well. So in the central basin of Mexico, death was very much embraced and just seen as, well, this is just part of the cycle, and iconography and symbolism associated with death was very much out in the open and acknowledged and embraced as just being, this is just part of our life cycle. This is just going on to the next step.
Curly, can you help us understand more about the imagery that is associated with the holiday? And again, the children's book, Altar Building with Shtawa and Tawa, there are images of marigolds and butterflies. And tell us more about that, and the skulls as well.
Yeah, so interestingly, the sugar skulls really came out of that Chicano art movement in a big way in the 1970s. 1972 specifically. I want to acknowledge the work of self-help graphics in Los Angeles and La Galería de la Raza in San Francisco. In 1972, these organizations in this movement, the Chicano movement, this move to reconnect and reaffirm our indigeneity, really started bringing this iconography up and sort of Chicanifying it. And the sugar skulls became almost this symbol of Chicano pride at the time. And in 1972, the first big Dia de los Muertos celebrations took place in the United States, thanks to these organizations. So I want to acknowledge their work. But the butterflies, especially, I think is a really profound and beautiful symbol, because it is said in the Nahuatl traditions anyway that butterflies are the reborn spirits of warriors who died in battle. And so these are our ancestors who had died in battle that are coming back to visit us in the form of butterflies. And this is men and women, male and female warriors, because women who died in childbirth, in the Nahuatl tradition, childbirth was seen as a form of warfare. Like a woman was going into battle and she was going into the other side, and she was taking a captive and bringing that captive into our reality. And so when a woman died in childbirth, it was looked upon as being equivalent to a warrior who had died in battle. And so the butterfly symbolism represents the spirits of these people coming back and spending time with us, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful and it's inspiring as well. Curly, what about the marigolds? What do they mean?
So the marigolds, Sempashochit in Nahuatl, it's the smell. The smell and the color is associated with helping to guide back the spirits of our ancestors to come be with us. So when you see the grave sites or the tlamanalis or the ofrendas decorated with the Sempoaxochitl, it's one of those markers, like a beacon, basically, helping to guide back the spirits of our ancestors.
Okay, thank you. Janet Martinez, anything you would like to add to this discussion about the imagery? Because again, so much of this is evident in the book Altar Building with Xtawa and Tawa.
Yes, for sure. I think that it's really one of those traditions that we see this imagery of the flowers at the altar, of the idea of the butterfly is one of the ones that, my grandmother would tell me when I would ask her, hey, how come the food isn't touched? And she would say, it's the butterflies, They're like butterflies, the dead that come and eat the aroma, right? That's why you don't see it touched. And it's a little bit of a reference in the book itself that we tell the character that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Curly, let's talk a little bit more again about the Americanization of Dia de los Muertos. And how do you feel when you see like a lot of these bars and nightclubs, they have Day of the Dead nights and just sales and things like that. What's your thought there?
Well, unfortunately, we live in the United States, right? And that's just the way things are here. Everything's going to be commodified and commercialized and monetized somehow. So I think it's just one of those unfortunate things that's just going to happen. But we can speak out against it, and I think the best thing to do is to educate people on the importance of these days, on the significance of the ceremony and the history behind these things. And really, I just kind of ignore it personally. We have our tlamanali here in the house, and we honor these days in our own way, in the privacy of our own home. And when I see, these big events, especially associated with, bar crawls and stuff like that, it's like, well, it's to be expected, unfortunately. And all I can do as an individual is to just try to educate people on how they should approach these things respectfully.
You just mentioned that you will be celebrating the holiday at home with your family, but what about in other parts of Albuquerque? Is there any concern about celebrations being canceled like we talked about with Janet earlier in Los Angeles?
I haven't heard too much. They had here in Old Town last weekend, there was a Dia de Muertos celebration down in Las Cruces. I saw them recently getting ready for a celebration. So I think everybody's moving forward cautiously. And I hope that, like in LA, that there are plans in place in case ICE does show up in case the immigration does show up, that there are plans in place to keep people safe. But I honestly think that it's important in a lot of ways that we move forward with these celebrations, because it's, the roots of Dia de los Muertos itself it's rooted in defiance and resistance and indigenous resistance. So I think that maintaining these traditions is keeping with that sense of resistance. And I haven't heard too much about concern, but I'm sure. I just hope people stay safe.
Right. Thank you, Curly. We're going to take another break here, and we'll be back. And the holiday, Dia de los Muertos, Mexican holiday, Day of the Dead. In contemporary times, built around the Catholic All Souls Day. Interesting holiday, interesting connections. We're learning a lot about the history of the holiday, the indigenous perspective, the indigenous history, and also how people relate to the holiday today, here in 2025, and some of these political issues that we're seeing in the United States, the commercialization as well. So really great conversation here. We really appreciate our three guests who have joined us to talk about this and educate us more about Dia de los Muertos. And again, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back. And we do have the phone lines open for folks who would like to join our conversation. That number is 1-800-996-2848. Give us a call, 1-800-996-2848. We're going to pivot here on the other side of this break, and we will be talking with Francine Blythe Lewis. So stay with us. We're going to learn about a Vision Maker Media project.
The Association on American Indian Affairs invites all to Tribal Museums Day, December 6th through December 12th. Tribal museums may offer no-cost or reduced admission, gift shop discounts, art markets, and live cultural demonstrations. Tribal Museums Day honors diverse Native nations as the experts of their own cultures. You can find a map of tribal museums and more at indian-affairs.org/Tribal Museums Day. The association supports this show.
Thanks for joining us today on Native America Calling. We've been talking about the indigenous origins of Dia de los Muertos, and now we'll hear about an initiative with Vision Maker Media to develop new Native filmmaker talent. Of course, listeners, you can join the show by calling in at 1-800-996-2848. That number again, 1-800-996-2848. Let's get some calls going. We've got the phone lines open, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Lincoln, Nebraska is Francine Blythe Lewis. She is the Executive Director of Vision Maker Media. She is Dene, Siston-Wapton, and Eastern Band of Cherokee. Francine, hello, and welcome back to the show. It's great to have you.
Yes, thank you. I'm always happy to be part of it.
It's always a pleasure when you can join us, Francine. Now, Vision Makers Native Youth Media Project. This is a pandemic-era initiative designed to expand the talent pool of young Native filmmakers. How does the program work to inspire young content makers?
Well, we work with, right now we work with Native youth organizations around the country. It doesn't matter if it's rural and community or urban. And we provide $25,000 support for that organization to create a training for Native youth in their community. It's completely autonomous in the sense that the organization determines the length, recruits the students, and develops the curriculum based on what they want to or they know the students' interests are. So it's all customized per each training. And then the only thing is the youth, they get the training, they create short video clips up to, I think we have it up to 20 minutes. They can do it together as a group, they can do it individually, and then they show their films to audiences somehow, some way in community partnership. And that gives the youth the opportunity to speak about their work.
Now, of course, with modern technology, anybody with a smartphone can shoot video. Is that the focus here, using smartphones and other mobile devices, or will they be using different types of equipment?
Generally, these trainings are more at the level of equipment. So film camera, not just cell phones, but film camera equipment, editorial suites, possibly even studio and scene setups. So it's a little bit more sophisticated than just shooting and creating a short doc on your or a short film on your iPhone.
Okay, well, tell us more about these skills and how they will enhance this young talent that you're working with in terms of like the editing process and just the filming, how to get the camera angles. I imagine you've got a whole curriculum set up here.
Well, one of the ideas is that in order to get the support from Vision Maker Media, the organization does have to have a filmmaker with the skills and training or education and knowledge of whatever it is they want to put forward in a training. So, for example, some organizations are really wanting to focus more on media archiving, and that's fine by us. It gives the students a different angle of technological training using media and what that takes. Other organizations do the training maybe over a summer of 8 weeks' time, and the students come back every week and they build upon their skills. Generally, it's, so there has to be a qualified filmmaker that knows and is able and comfortable to train youth to make short films. And so usually that requires storyboarding, it requires camera, knowledge and use of camera equipment, how sophisticated or how, easy level it is of that camera use, but it's outside of the cell phone. And then shooting productions, creating the timeline of a production shoot, what all does that take once you've got your story idea, and then doing the actual shooting, and then editing, both online and offline editing. So that could be, computer with Adobe Suite editing video or whatever it might be, and then making their final cut, and then being able then to present it to the public somehow, some way. Some of the organizations partner with a film festival, and so the students' work are shown there at the film festival to audiences, and they all have an opportunity to talk about their films in a QA session after their screening. Some work with the local museum, and the museum creates a special exhibition of the students' videos, and then the students do a panel, maybe on opening day of the exhibit, with audience that are there that want to learn and see these films and hear from the students. Some of them just do maybe a community screening and at the community center and do a feed with that and invite all the community to come, but also, again, the students are there to be able to talk about their films. And so it can be, it's a whole range of whatever, but the reason why we work with the organizations is because they know their community, they know their youth, and they know best to develop that curriculum. We stay out of that whole realm.
Okay. This all sounds fantastic, Francine, really exciting. Can you tell us more about some specific success stories that have come out of the project so far?
Well, we started this program in 2020. Of course, it was COVID, and there's shutdowns everywhere. And so one of our first organizations that we worked with was a group in Alaska. And their whole plan was before the shutdown, and COVID was just, being monitored, hadn't quite really reached the U.S., we all went into shutdown. So their whole plan was to bring in Native youth from around Alaska to Anchorage for a 1-week intensive, and to do all of this, from storyboarding to final cut to community engagement. And the shutdown happened. So they quickly pivoted to doing this training online. And so then they were able to reach far more Native youth across their state and did this training online. Well, one of the youth her success story, she basically was bored, looking for something to do. You couldn't do anything because you couldn't go anywhere because nothing was open. She came across this, decided to sign up, has no idea and no aspiration to be a filmmaker, but it filled her boredom. So she did it, thoroughly enjoyed it. And what generally happens is when these young people are creating their stories is generally they go back to community or their elders because there's research. You can't just make a, sci-fi action in a short film. So they go back and learn what would of interest would make their story. In this case, this young lady talked with her grandma. Her grandma told her stories and knowledge about land connection. So the young lady wrote a poem, and then she made this beautiful, poetic short film, reading her poem with scenery going on in the film. Fast forward to that, there was a call out by PBS Nova and looking for people who wanted to make digital shorts for their YouTube channel under a program called Legacy of Land. And this young lady submitted a new idea, and it got accepted. And so she got to work. This is probably about 2 years after her first film that she made through the Native Youth Training. She worked then with, PBS level producers on creating her short film, and you can now watch it on Nova YouTube channel under the Legacy of Land. And hers is it's about her community in Alaska. I cannot remember the name of her film right now.
Okay.
But that's a success story, and she is continuing to make films now. She's returned to her community and wanting to make films that the community wants.
Okay. Francine, what makes this program sound so auspicious at the moment is that, of course, federal funding for public media has been eliminated this year, and there's been a lot of effort towards keeping tribal radio stations and other tribal media, public media specifically, online. I think your situation at Vision Maker might be a little bit different, but what do audiences stand to lose with the loss of federal support to Vision Maker?
Oh my gosh. Seeing content, the films, 30, 60, 90-minute documentary stories about communities of Native people, whatever's going on that, resonates from boarding schools to, rejuvenating old traditions of fishing or, first language speakers in 5 generations emerging. So any of those topics showing on PBS TV. A lot of our programs, when they're completed, we submit them out to make available for any of the PBS stations. There's about 200 of them throughout the United States to program it somewhere within their lineup of shows. And that, with the absence of public media funding, is in serious jeopardy. I am currently trying to fundraise to figure a new way of evolving that we can still continue to be a part of public media. All of public media is transforming. It will be different. We don't know. Nobody has the answers to what that will look like. So we're just, right now, Vision Maker Media, trying to figure out ourselves, how would we contribute? We definitely know we want to do more digital and local.
Tell me more about your fundraising strategy. Are you focusing on large philanthropic organizations? Are you doing more local donations? What's the approach?
Primarily, we're doing it by major foundations and also local foundations here in Lincoln, Nebraska. One thing I really believe is, Vision Maker Media started in Lincoln, Nebraska. In 1976, it opened its doors. But before that, there was a few years of, brainstorming, development, and all this. And it was really kind of led by some real public media leaders in Nebraska and who were working at the Nebraska Public Media Station at the time, plus my dad and some other Native producers who were in public media at the time, which I think my dad said there was about 6. And so and then just deciding to have the offices here in Lincoln, Nebraska, Nebraskans are very proud. And to me, that's something, 49 years here in Lincoln, Nebraska, contributing to public media is a real thing to be very proud of. So that's why we're doing local and also trying to build our individual donor campaigns over, between now and the end of the year.
Okay, you mentioned your father, of course, the highly admired and respected late Frank Blythe, passed away a couple of years ago. Tell me a little bit more, though, about his vision and just how this project you're talking about today builds upon that.
Well, in the early days when he very first started, public media in general was thinking, oh, we want the historic dramas of Indian wars, Indian chiefs. My dad wanted to bring the contemporary and the today lives of Native people to public television, because back then in the early 70s, and this was before American Indian movement, there wasn't a real awareness that Native people were really alive, and it was extremely stereotypical. And the imagery and media of Native people, was from savages or romanticism or the Westerns. And so my dad's vision was bring the contemporary stories and lives and experiences of Native people, and maybe if we reflect on histories, how it's affecting today's lives of Native people. And we continue with that vision today. Right before he passed, I did ask him what he would like to see Vision Maker Media phase, over the next decades of work that we do, and he said invest in the youth. And so that's why we have the Native Youth Media Training Program. We've got the Creative Shorts Fellowship, and we also earlier this year launched our Native Shorts for Kids on Vision Maker Media's YouTube channel.
And Francine, for any of our listeners who are interested in learning more about the Native Youth Media Project or any of these other projects you just mentioned, what's the best way to do that?
They can just go to our website at visionmakermedia.org, and there they can watch films. They can watch films that are made for kids. A lot of our films also, they're meant to be educational, so teachers can use them in the classroom. They can also find other areas where we're out there in broadcast, so they can click on PBS on our website and find in their local station any of our programming that may be airing. And especially with Native American Heritage Month coming up, there's going to be so much of Native content on public media during that month that we're really, really proud, new and old program that we're really proud to be having in broadcast. And to say that 80% of any content on public television generally is produced and comes from Vision Maker Media. So with the loss of the public media funding, that's a scary percentage of programming lost in public television.
Okay, and we do have about a minute before we have to wrap up, but you do mention public television, and of course you have a partnership with PBS. Any concerns there or any information you can share with regard to what that means going forward with regard to Vision Maker and PBS?
Well, I think public media, PBS, is going to continue to exist. It's just going to be different. And like I said, from all the conversations, nobody knows yet what that will be. So we're all trying to figure it out. But one thing I do hear repeatedly is that PBS stations are going to be more local. And for Vision Maker Media, I'm thinking, okay, before contact, there were no boundaries. There were Native people everywhere. So let me start to make partnerships with stations to help them connect with communities from those original places. So if you're Cherokee, for example, we're both in the Carolinas and we're in Oklahoma. But before contact, we were in Georgia, Tennessee, the Carolinas, Kentucky, all of that area. So let me connect with those stations to help them realize you've got local content here working with the tribe, and help them find the talent and the stories to co-produce.
All right. Francine, thank you so much for joining the show. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And with that, we are going to have to wrap up our conversation today. I want to thank all of our guests, Anita Huizar Hernandez, Janet Martinez, Curly Tlapoyawa, and Francine Blythe Lewis. Join us again on Monday when we'll hear about the increasing threat from wildfires in the Arctic. Our executive producer is Art Hughes. Our producers are Andy Murphy, Sol Traverso, and Joe Thompson. Marino Spencer is the engineer. Sho McPolin is the digital producer. Nola Daves Moses is the distribution director. Bob Peterson is the network manager for Native Voice One. Clifton Chadwick is our national underwriting sales director. Antonia Gonzalez is the anchor for National Native News. Charles Sather is our chief operations officer. The president and CEO of Koahnic Broadcast Corporation is Jacqueline Salee. Have a safe weekend. I'm Sean Spruce.
Support provided by Amerind. Amerind is 100% tribally owned and partners with tribes and their businesses to provide affordable commercial insurance coverage, protect tribal sovereignty, and strengthen Native American communities by helping to keep dollars in Indian country. Information about property, liability, commercial auto, and workers' comp available at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Early detection saves lives. Jodanigo Hanadagila, Indian healthcare provider Dan, Gi breast cancer screening, Gi Eben Ye Adana Nadoli. Nidakid Nagina Holongo healthcare.gov/coverage. Aj Ayapit the Din. Don't die Ayapish Baudilne. 1-800-318-2596. Raj Ayapja Bish Baudilne. A message from Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.